Imagine a quiet village where the laughter of children once filled the air was now silenced by the weight of abandonment. A mother's love is meant to be unshakable, a bond forged in sacrifice and care. But what happens when that bond is broken by a forbidden passion? This is the haunting story of a woman who turned her back on her two children. In the quiet hills of northern Thailand, there lay a small, tightly knit village where everyone knew everyone else. The community thrived on rice farming, early mornings spent in the fields, and nights filled with shared meals and stories under the stars. It was a place where tradition ruled and family was sacred. To abandon one's family was not only unthinkable, but an act of unforgivable betrayal. In the heart of the village lived Lan, a young widow in her early 30s, raising her two children, Ping and Mai. Her husband had died in a tragic farming accident 3 years prior, leaving her to shoulder the burdens of parenthood alone. Lan was a pretty woman, with a beauty that turned heads even as her face bore the weariness of grief and toil. Her children were her world, but life was hard and they were so poor. Despite the pity from neighbors, Lan remained steadfast, working tirelessly to provide for her children. She spent her days in the fields, her hands weak from planting rice, and her evenings weaving silk to sell in the market. But beneath this hard-working woman lay a yearning, a deep, unspoken desire for freedom, for something more than the monotony of survival. It was during one of her trips to the market that Lan's life changed forever. A man named Somchai, a traveler from the city of Bangkok, came to the village. He claimed to be an entrepreneur, someone who had left behind his urban life to explore the beauty of rural Thailand. He was charming, his stories of city life mesmerizing. The villagers welcomed him cautiously, intrigued by his story, but they had no idea of his intentions. For Lan, Somchai was unlike anyone she had ever met. He brought with him the allure of a world she had only dreamed of, a world of opportunity, wealth, and freedom. He began visiting the village more frequently, his attention focused on Lan. He admired and praised her beauty, her strength, and her spirit. Lan's children, Ping and Mai, adored their mother and relied on her for everything. Ping, a 10-year-old, was mature beyond his years, often helping Lan in the fields and taking care of his younger sister. Mai, who is only 6, was brilliant and full of questions, always clinging to her mother's skirts. They sensed something changing in Lan, but couldn't quite understand what it was. Somchai's visits became more frequent, and soon he began speaking of a life they could build together. He told Lon about the opportunities waiting for her in Bangkok, about the freedom she could have if she left behind the shackles of village life. At first, Lon resisted. Her children needed her, and she couldn't fathom abandoning them. But Somchai's promises were like seeds planted in fertile soil, growing with each passing day. The village began to notice the change in Lan. She became distant, distracted. She spent less time with her children, often disappearing for hours to meet Somchai. The gossips of the neighbors grew louder and concern for Ping and Mai spread. But Lan brushed off their concerns, convincing herself that she was entitled to happiness after years of sacrifice. One rainy evening, Lan made a decision that would forever change the course of her children's lives. She packed a small bag, careful not to wake Ping or Mai. She left no note, no explanation, only the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. As the rain poured down, Lan slipped away into the night, following Somchai to the city and leaving her children to wake up in an empty home. Ping and Mai woke to an unusual silence, the usual sounds of their mother preparing breakfast conspicuously absent. At first they thought she had gone to the market, but as the hours stretched into days, the realization of her absence began to sink in. The neighbors came around them, offering food and comfort, but nothing could fill the void left by their mother. Ping took on the role of protector, shielding Mai from the harsh reality of their abandonment. He assured her that their mother would return, even as his heart ached with doubt. The village elders convened to decide what to do with the children. Some suggested sending them to relatives in a neighboring town, while others believed they should remain in the village, where they were known and cared for. Meanwhile, in Bangkok, Lan was swept up in the adventure of her new life. Somchai introduced her to a world of luxury, fancy restaurants, lavish parties, and a lifestyle she had never imagined. For a while, she was able to push thoughts of her children to the back of her mind. convincing herself that they were better off without her. But the reality of her new life was far from the dream Samchai had painted. As weeks turned into months, Lan began to see cracks in his charming personality. He was controlling and manipulative, dictating her every move and isolating her from anyone who might influence her. She felt trapped, but her pride kept her from returning to the village. Back in the village, Ping and Mai were struggling to survive. Despite the support of their neighbors, the absence of their mother was a wound to them. Ping worked tirelessly, doing odd jobs to provide for Mai, all the while harboring a quiet rage against the woman who had abandoned them. The village, too, was grappling with the scandal of Lan's departure. In a culture that revered motherhood and family, her actions were seen as a betrayal not only of her children, but of the community itself. The whispers turned to condemnation, and Lan's name became a cautionary tale for young women tempted by the lure of city life. As time went on, the villagers began to notice changes in Ping. He had grown quiet and withdrawn, his bright eyes dulled by the weight of responsibility. Mai, too, had changed, her innocence eroded by the harsh reality of their situation. One day, a letter arrived in the village, addressed to Ping and Mai. It was from Lan. If you have watched to this moment, that means you are enjoying the documentary. Subscribing to our channel gives you better access to more interesting stories just like this one. She wrote of her regret, her struggles, and her desire to see them again. But she stopped short of apologizing, her words tinged with a defensiveness that suggested she was still grappling with her choices. Ping read the letter in silence, his face filled with no emotion. When he finished, he folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. He said nothing to Mai, choosing instead to protect her from the confusion and pain the letter had stirred in him. The letter sparked a wave of debate among the villagers. Some saw it as a sign that Lan might return, while others dismissed it as an empty gesture. For Ping, it was a reminder of the mother he had lost, and the resentment he carried grew stronger. Unknown to Ping and Mai, Lan was facing her own struggles in Bangkok. Samchai's promises had proven hollow, and she found herself trapped in a relationship that was as suffocating as it was destructive. She began to dream of returning to the village, of making amends with her children, and rebuilding the life she had left behind. But the path back was not so simple. The villagers' judgment, the shame of her actions, and the fear of rejection all loomed large. Lan was caught between two worlds, one that offered freedom but no love, and another that held love but no freedom. As the days in the village went on, Ping found himself grappling with responsibilities far beyond his years. At only 10 years old, he had become the head of their small household, thrust into the role of caretaker and provider for his younger sister, Mai. The weight of their mother's absence pressed down on him daily, but he refused to show his pain. Neighbors offered what help they could, a bowl of rice here, a spare shirt there, but the gossip never ceased. The gossip that floated through the village painted Lan as a selfish woman who had abandoned her children for a fleeting fantasy. Ping heard every word, and each one was like a dagger to his chest. He didn't have the heart to tell Mai what the villagers were saying. Instead, he assured her their mother would return one day, though his own belief in that promise was faltering. Mai, oblivious to the depth of their pain, clung to the hope that their mother would walk through the door at any moment. She spoke of Lan often, recounting memories of their shared laughter and warmth. Ping would smile and nod, but each story Mai told only deepened the hollow ache in his chest. To make ends meet, Ping began helping out in the rice fields after school. He was small for his age, but his determination outweighed his physical limitations. The elders in the village admired his resilience and silently mourned the loss of his childhood. Yet, even as he labored under the sun, Ping couldn't help but feel a simmering anger toward Lan. She had left them to fend for themselves in a world that had no mercy for the young and vulnerable. Meanwhile, in the city of Bangkok, Lan's dream of a better life was crashing. At first, the city had been a wonderland, a place of bright lights and endless possibilities. Samchai had showered her with gifts, taken her to fine restaurants, and introduced her to a life she had never imagined. For a time, she believed she had made the right choice, but the glitter began to fade as Somchai's true nature was revealed. He was possessive, quick-tempered, and dismissive of her feelings. Len realized too late that his promises of freedom were a lie. She had traded one form of imprisonment for another. She spent her days confined to a small apartment, isolated from the world she had hoped to embrace. Her thoughts often drifted back to Ping and Mai. She wondered how they were managing without her, whether they were eating enough, whether they hated her for leaving. Guilt gnawed at her, but she buried it beneath the justifications she had clung to since the night she left. She told herself that she deserved happiness, that her sacrifice would eventually lead to a better future for all of them. One evening, while Somchai was out, Lan decided to write to her children. The letter was an awkward mixture of apology and explanation. She told them she missed them, that she thought of them every day, and that she hoped they were doing well. But she stopped short of promising to return. To admit her mistake and face the scorn of the village felt like an insurmountable task. When the letter reached the village, it caused a stir. Some of the elders saw it as a sign that Lan might come back, while others dismissed it as a hollow gesture meant to ease her guilt. Ping read the letter in silence, his face betraying no emotion. He carefully folded it and placed it in the drawer where he kept their few cherished possessions. He didn't share it with Mai, unwilling to give her false hope. Life in the village grew increasingly difficult for Ping and Mai. The monsoon season arrived, bringing heavy rains that flooded the fields and made work nearly impossible. With no income and dwindling supplies, Ping was forced to rely more heavily on the charity of their neighbors. Though he hated the pity in their eyes, he swallowed his pride for Mai's sake. One night, as the rain battered their small home, Mai asked Ping a question he couldn't answer. "Do you think Mama will ever come back?" Ping hesitated, the words catching in his throat. He wanted to tell her the truth, that he didn't know, that he wasn't even sure if he wanted her to come back. But he saw the hope in Mai's eyes, the fragile belief that their mother still loved them, and he couldn't bring himself to shatter it. "She'll come back," he said softly. "She just needs more time." Mai nodded and curled up beside him, her small body trembling from the cold weather outside. Ping lay awake long after she had fallen asleep, listening to the rain and wondering how much longer he could hold everything together. Far away in Bangkok, Lan sat alone in the dim light of the apartment. She stared out at the city skyline, her mind racing with thoughts of her children. The guilt she had suppressed for so long was now unbearable. She began to question everything: her choices, her desires, and the cost of her choice of freedom. Somchai returned home late that night, reeking of alcohol and anger. They argued, as they often did, and Lan realized with startling clarity that she was trapped. The life she had left her children for was a lie, and the man she had trusted was nothing more than a manipulator. For the first time, Lan considered the possibility of leaving him and returning to the village. But the thought of facing Ping and Mai, of admitting her failure, filled her with dread. How could she ask for their forgiveness when she had abandoned them so completely? The weight of her guilt pressed down on her, suffocating and relentless. As dawn broke over the city, Lan made a decision. She would leave Somchai and return to the village, no matter the cost. She knew it wouldn't be easy, that the road to redemption would be long and painful, but she also knew that she couldn't continue living this lie. Her children needed her, and she needed to face the consequences of her actions. Lan began making plans, quietly gathering what little money she had saved and mapping out her route back to the village. She didn't know what awaited her there, whether she would be welcomed or shunned, whether Ping and Mai would even want to see her. But she knew she had to try. Lan's decision to leave Somchai and return to her children was not easy. The harsh reality of the situation was settling in, and with every passing day, she found herself growing more desperate to make amends for the choices she had made. As she packed her belongings, a mix of anticipation and pain filled her heart. There was no guarantee that Ping and Mai would forgive her, no certainty that they would welcome her back into their lives, but she had no choice but to try. In the quiet of the night, Lan slipped away from Somchai's apartment, leaving behind the life that had promised freedom but delivered only isolation. She boarded a bus that would take her back to the village, clutching her small bag, with nothing but the hope that her children were still waiting for her. The journey was long, and with every mile that passed, Lan found herself reflecting on the life she had left behind. The city, which had once seemed so full of promise, now felt like a nightmare. The glittering lights, the luxury, and the thrill of Somchai's attentions had all faded into nothingness. All that remained was the hollow emptiness of a life that had no meaning without her children. When she finally arrived in the village, it was late afternoon. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the familiar dirt roads. Lan hesitated for a moment at the edge of the village, feeling the weight of the years she had spent away from her family. The villagers knew what she had done, and she was certain they would judge her harshly, but she couldn't turn back now. With a deep breath, she walked into the village, her heart pounding in her chest. The first person she saw was Mrs. Lee, a neighbor who had once been a close friend. The older woman's face was inscrutable as she took in Lan's appearance. "You've returned," Mrs. Lee said softly, her tone neutral. "We all thought you had forgotten about your children." Lan swallowed hard, the shame of her actions making her throat tighten. "I'm here to make things right," she whispered. Mrs. Lee's gaze softened for a moment, but she said nothing more. She merely nodded and turned away, as if she knew there was nothing more to say. As Lan walked further into the village, she felt the eyes of the people on her, some curious, some judgmental, and some simply indifferent. It was clear that her return was not welcome by everyone, but she couldn't afford to care. All she could think about was finding Ping and Mai and trying to rebuild the bond she had shattered. She went to their home, the small, humble house that had once been filled with laughter and warmth. The door was ajar, and Lan hesitated before stepping inside. The interior was just as she remembered. Simple, with the same wooden furniture and the familiar scent of rice and herbs in the air. Ping was sitting at the table, his face buried in a book. He didn't look up when Lan entered, and for a moment she wondered if he even recognized her. "Ping," Lan called softly, her voice trembling. The boy's head snapped up, and for a moment their eyes locked. It was as if time stood still, and Lan could see the pain and anger that lurked in her son's eyes. His gaze was cold, distant, and it hit her like a physical blow. He had changed. "Why are you here?" Ping asked. His voice flat and emotionless. Lan felt her heart break. She had expected anger, but she hadn't prepared for this. This complete lack of warmth. This distance that felt like an insurmountable chasm between them. "I'm sorry," Lang whispered, stepping forward. "I know I've hurt you, Ping, but I'm here now, and I want to make it right. I need you to forgive me." Ping stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing her words, but there was no forgiveness in his eyes. "You left us," he said quietly, his voice shaking with suppressed emotion. "You chose him over us. Do you think you can just come back and everything will be okay?" Lan opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She had no answer for him, no justification that could erase the pain she had caused. For a moment, the silence between them was suffocating. Then, from the other room, Mai's voice called out, sweet and innocent. "Ping, who's there?" Ping turned toward the sound of his sister's voice, and Lan saw the fleeting softness in his expression as he looked at her. But it was gone in an instant. "Stay here," Ping said, his voice low. "I'll tell her you're here." Lan watched as Ping walked away, his footsteps heavy and reluctant. She stood frozen in place, her heart in her throat. This wasn't how she had imagined their reunion. She had hoped for a tearful embrace, for a sense of relief to wash over her as her children welcomed her back. But now, she was unsure whether she would ever earn their forgiveness. A few moments later, Ping returned, his younger sister Mai trailing behind him. Mai's face lit up when she saw Lan, and for a fleeting moment, the guilt that had weighed so heavily on Lan's heart softened. "Mama!" Mai cried, rushing toward her with open arms. Lan knelt down, and Mai wrapped her small arms around her mother. The warmth of her embrace filled Lan's chest, and for the first time in years, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could fix this. But, as Lan pulled back to look at her daughter's face, she saw that Ping was standing behind her, his arms crossed over his chest. He hadn't moved, and his expression was one of quiet resignation. Don't expect things to be the same, Ping said quietly. I'm not a child anymore, and I'm not going to forget what you did. Lan felt the sting of his words, and the tears that had been threatening to spill finally fell. She couldn't deny the truth of what Ping had said. She had left them, and she could try. She could try to make it right. I'm so sorry, Ping, she whispered, her voice breaking. I've made so many mistakes, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I will do whatever it takes to prove that I'm here for you now. For both of you. Mai looked up at her mother with wide, trusting eyes. Mama, can we be a family again? Lan nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes, we can. We can try. As the sun set over the village, Lan knew the road to redemption would be long and difficult. But with Ping and Mai by her side, she was willing to face whatever came next. It was a start, and that was enough. Lan spent the following weeks slowly rebuilding the fragile bridge she had burned years ago. The small victories, the moments when Ping or Mai allowed her to stay for dinner or smiled faintly at her, felt like great triumphs. It wasn't easy. It was a quiet, painful process, one that demanded humility and persistence. Lan knew she couldn't undo the hurt of the past, but she was determined to build something new, something stronger and more enduring, even if it took a lifetime. At the heart of her struggle was Ping. He was the one she had hurt the most, the one who had been left to carry the weight of abandonment, the one who could never truly forgive her. Lang often found herself staring at him, wondering what he thought when he looked at her. Did he remember the moments they had shared, the laughter they had once known? Or had the distance she created between them become too wide to bridge? Ping was a different person now, older, more guarded, more brilliant and calculative. He had learned to survive without her. When Lan tried to talk to him, he often responded with short, cold answers. He rarely met her eyes, as if her gaze still carried a burden he wasn't ready to bear. The warmth that had once been in their relationship was gone, replaced by an icy silence that both stung and reminded Lan of the devastation she had caused. Still, she didn't give up. She attended his school events, took him to the market, and insisted on preparing meals for him, despite his reluctance. Lan knew these acts wouldn't instantly repair their fractured bond, but she hoped they would demonstrate her commitment to her children. Slowly, she began to notice small shifts. One evening, Ping stayed at the table longer than usual, helping her clean up after dinner. Another time, he casually mentioned how much he missed the way they used to spend weekends together before she left. There was something about these moments that gave Lan hope, but they also reminded her of the years she had lost. Time, once a constant presence in her life, now seemed like an enemy. Each passing day was a reminder of her failings, of the trust she had shattered. But even with these harsh truths, she clung to the idea that redemption was possible. Mai, on the other hand, was a different story. The young girl seemed to welcome Lan back with a smile that made the older woman's heart ache. Mai was the child who had still believed, even when Lan had abandoned them, that her mother would return. She would often sit by Lan, helping her with chores, offering small words of encouragement. It was as if Mai had never been truly hurt by her mother's decision to leave. Lan felt both grateful for and guilty about her daughter's unwavering love. But as much as Mai seemed unaffected by Lan's absence, there was still a part of her that remained distant. Lan noticed how the girl would often look at her older brother for reassurance. Ping was the one who had been forced to step into the role of protector, the one who had kept Mai safe while their mother was gone. Lan saw the subtle ways Mai leaned on Ping for comfort, the small gestures of support he offered her without word. The siblings' bond was strong, forged through hardship, and Lan was an outsider in that relationship. The tension between the three of them continued to linger, like an invisible barrier that Lan couldn't quite break through. There were moments when she could almost feel the old connection returning, when Mai would laugh at something funny, or when Ping would comment on a shared memory, but those moments were disappearing. One afternoon, Lan decided to take a bold step. She spoke to Ping alone in the quiet of their small home. Mai was playing outside, and the house felt eerily silent. It was a rare opportunity to talk to her son, to try to bridge the gap between them. "Ping," she began, her voice trembling with emotion, "I know you're angry, and I don't blame you for it. You have every right to be. I was selfish, and I abandoned you when you needed me the most. Ping didn't say anything at first. He sat across from her, his eyes fixed on the floor. Lan's heart pounded in her chest as she waited for a response. Ping, she continued, her voice softer now. I've been trying to make it right, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for leaving you and for not being there when you needed me. Ping's gaze finally shifted from the floor to her face. His eyes were still cold, but there was something more, something that looked almost like sorrow. I don't know if I can forgive you, he said quietly, his voice heavy with emotion. But I can't keep pretending it didn't happen either. I don't know what to feel. Lam felt her heart break a little more at his words. He wasn't angry anymore, but the confusion and hurt in his eyes told her just how deeply her abandonment had cut him. I don't expect you to forgive me now, Ping, she said, fighting back tears. I just want you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere this time. I'm going to do whatever it takes to be the mother you deserve. Ping didn't respond, but Lan saw something shift in his expression. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step forward, a crack in the wall that had once separated them. As the weeks passed, the family slowly began to heal. Lan continued to support her children in small but meaningful ways. She tried to be there for them, to offer them the stability they had lost. She worked hard to earn their trust, even when it seemed impossible. But the scars of the past would never fully fade. Lan knew that, and so did Ping. The wounds she had inflicted on her children would never disappear completely, and forgiveness would be a long and difficult process. Yet, despite the challenges, there was a glimmer of hope. The road to redemption was never easy, but Lan was determined to walk it, one step at a time, and as she stood there, looking at her children, she knew that she would fight every day to rebuild their lives together. She had made her mistakes, but this time she wouldn't give up. As the sun set over the village, Lan couldn't help but think that perhaps the love of a mother, no matter how fractured, had the power to heal even the deepest wounds. Time would tell, but for now, she had the chance to prove it. If you were in the children's shoes, would you forgive, or would the betrayal be too much? Hit that subscribe button and tell us your thoughts in the comments section.